Hello and welcome to a new Lakers Theory podcast. I'm Shane Jackson. Join with me, as always, is Austin Case. We are, much like the Lakers, recharged and ready to rock because we have not recorded a podcast for 3 weeks. A lot of reasons for that. Mostly, the Lakers have not played basketball. I don't know if you know this. It's been an All-Star break. Secondly, I have been swamped the last couple weeks. I cover sports here in Lawrence, and all the key people are getting fired. All these high school teams are winning, and it has been a brutal stretch the last couple weeks for me, and I've been constantly busy. So not really recharged on my end. Austin, how are you doing? Are you actually recharged?
Yeah, somewhat. It's hard to be fully recharged when you have a 5-year-old, but about as recharged as I can be at my point.
Is that who you were just talking to, motioning
Yes.
towards? Okay.
Yes, I was.
For those who don't know, if you're listening on the audio version on Apple, Spotify, or whatever you get your audio podcasts, you can watch it, the video version, on YouTube. And Austin was motioning towards Carter to tell him to get away. If you are watching on video, you are seeing that I have not shaved in like 3 weeks because I've just given up. You know, I cover these games and I have a mask on, and I'm like, nobody needs to see this. And I didn't think about that until we got on this podcast. Like, oh, I haven't shaved and I look like a grizzly bear. So just a lot of things going wrong for me. And as fate would have it, I'm turning another year older tomorrow. So this is just all things are coming down spiral and for me. But we'll try to make the best of this show because it has been a few weeks. But I figured, one, because it's been so long, and two, because there's nothing going on and it's All-Star break, let's step back. Let's take a big picture look at how the first half of the season went for the Lakers. Also a good time to reevaluate. We offered preseason predictions in one of our first shows, and I wanted to compare what we thought then to versus what we thought now, and if we wanted to change any of those award predictions that we handed out before the season. And I wanted to look forward. You know, the second half of the season starts here in a couple of days. The Lakers will play the Pacers on Friday. We are recording this Wednesday, March 10th, so we'll probably have a show at some point, you know, over the first couple of games in the second half of the season, and then we'll start getting into the grind again. It'll be once per week. I will move to the spring sports season, so it'll be a lot easier for me to do more shows more frequently because, you know, baseball games don't last until 11 o'clock at night. So that will be fun, and we'll get to really dive deep on this team for the second half of the season as they prepare for the postseason. But before we do that, let's reevaluate how the first half of the season went. The Lakers, they're 24-13, third in the West behind the Jazz and the Suns, in case you didn't know the standings and the record. But we'll start with what we've done with most of these podcasts. I always ask you for one big takeaway. I think that's an important thing to offer up just your main point. And so let's start with that, Austin. What was your biggest takeaway from the first half of the season?
The biggest thing that stood out to me was like a lot of the Laker basketball we saw was not very pretty. Like it was frustrating a lot of the times for me. But in all that, we saw flashes of what they can be, and that's what I fully expect moving forward.
Yeah, that's a good point. That kind of coincides with what I put down, and I put it down before you did, but obviously it was okay that we had similar takeaways, but mine was more that this was the scene setter. This was everyone getting to know, when you're reading a book or watching a movie, the first few chapters in the book or movie, in the first handful of minutes in the movie, you're developing these characters. You're introducing everybody. You're forming these kind of relationships and stuff like that. And it's not always the most exciting thing. And so, although I thought it wasn't super exciting at times this year in the first half of the season, I thought this was a good, first part of the season of what is probably, a few part season, 2 or 3 part season. This was just, hey, let's introduce some new pieces like Dennis Schroeder, Montrezl Harrell to the team. Although it's a defending champion, there were a lot of new moving parts, and I thought the first half of the season was important in that regard to figure out what the Lakers have on this team. And then moving forward, we're going to get into that in the later half of the show, but essentially it's round into form, peak in the postseason, and reach the climax in the book or the movie at some point down there. And that ends with the Lakers winning another championship, hopefully. So I think, although a bit underwhelming, I would say the first half was an important step in terms of setting the scene for what the season's going to be. But yeah, let's dive into more specific angles, I would say. And for that, I want to start with, a positive, takeaway, whatever it is that you have. What is one positive thing from the first half that is more specific rather than the kind of the broad big picture look?
So my biggest positive takeaway is that LeBron James is 36 years old, and he is proving to us every night he steps on the court that he is still the best basketball player in the world. So that's like my big thing, and it's just spectacular to see.
Yeah, and it's really interesting when you go back and listen to the preseason show, right? We both, spoiler alert, picked AD to be the Lakers MVP. I think you might have actually picked him to win the NBA MVP, if I remember correctly. I don't know if you did. Not obviously going to happen. Yes. And, AD could still be the Lakers MVP when it's all said and done, but it's highly unlikely, I would say. And I think our analysis behind that was, it's a shorter offseason. LeBron is another year older. He's going to say, hey, this is AD. You carry the team. And it's been vice versa. I think, we'll get into a little bit later, but fatigue is a real factor with this team. And the one person it hasn't affected is the guy who's the oldest on the team, who has the most miles on the team. It's insane. And so, I had first dibs on this as well. I didn't want to pick LeBron because at some point it will just become a meme that I'm this LeBron super fan. But that it is obviously the biggest positive from the first half of the season is that what we are watching is truly special, and we should cherish every second of it. And we should remember that, a few weeks ago, Austin in a podcast, he said he doesn't think LeBron can carry an NBA team anymore. So,
I said, he couldn't carry a team like he used to be able to.
Makes sense. No, but I've made that or your statement known to a bunch of people that are, that we're mutually connected to. I've said, hey, here's what Austin said. So if you ever listen to the podcast, make fun of him. But no, I thought that was a good positive, and really the biggest positive for the first half of the season. For me, I put the Lakers defense. I saw a stat via CBS Sports, but it's basically that the Lakers had the best rate in points per possession allowed to opponents, according to Synergy today. And that speaks volumes to what we've kind of been saying the last couple of weeks is the defense really didn't let up, which is something that maybe we harped on too much in the first couple shows that we did here, the Lakers Theory. By the way, this is, I think, podcast number 18. So big moves for us. It's hard to believe that, 16, 17 podcasts ago, we were talking about, hey, the concerning thing is that the defense that was the identity of this team last year is going to take a step back. And if anything, it's gotten better. And I think that's been surprising. I think a lot of that has to do with guys that we thought were offense first acquisitions like Schroeder and Trez have kind of bought in to that mindset of, hey, they're going to play defense because that's what the Lakers have done. The interesting part is that if you look at the stats, the on-off splits, the Lakers have actually been better defensively without AD in the first half of the season. And I think, LeBron deserves a ton of credit. Actually, that kind of, relates to what you said, but probably the biggest thing about LeBron is that his defense has been really good this year. And when you factor in AD not being involved as of late, it's remarkable of how good this defense has been without a rim protector. And, obviously it's probably not something that can sustain, but I just think it deserved a whole separate topic here because I don't think we fully appreciate just how good the Lakers are defensively compared to what we thought they were going to be entering the year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that kind of ties in with my concern just a little bit, just because it's defense. But yeah, it's and I kind of thought about this as you were talking about, like the rim protection just really isn't there of what we saw last year. But I feel like the defensive guard play, just their abilities to guard like the 1 and 2 better.
Yeah.
is maybe why their defensive rating, or they're still one of the better defenses, because they're able to guard around the perimeter a little better. And I don't know if that's factual. That's just kind of what I was trying to think, because like the defensive identity is completely different.
Yeah.
And so that's just like, I'm trying to piece it together. Like, how are they still so good defensively, even though they can't protect the rim?
It could be, yeah, it could be as simple as, I mean, Frank Vogel, that's his identity, right? And then when you have a superstar like a LeBron, who's incredibly smart, and he also buys in on the end of the floor, because he didn't in the first year with the Lakers. He was not bought in on the end of the floor. AD came and AD said, hey, you're going to play defense. And so LeBron did, and he's even better, I think, this year on that defensive end. So when you have Vogel and LeBron kind of setting the tone, I think that is what you can attribute to this Lakers success on the defensive end of the floor, is how I would put it. I don't know. Maybe that is just an easy cop-out way, just saying, hey, LeBron deserves credit, coach deserves credit. But I think that it really is as simple as that, and everyone else has kind of bought in, because a lot of these players have the traits. I mean, we were talking about the Dennis Schroeder before the season. We thought, hey, he has skill set that could translate to that into the floor, and maybe we didn't see it all the time, night in, night out. And now we do, because we're actually following him playing. And so, yeah, I think you're seeing guys who had the ability within them, and then you have guys who lead the program like Vogel and LeBron, who kind of set the tone with that. So, did you get into your concern with the rim protection? Or did I cut you off? I'm sorry.
No, it's fine. No, I wasn't fully into it, but we can get into that now. Like, my big concern from the first half was, like, the rim protection just really wasn't there. And I think the biggest problem it caused was guys aren't scared to dribble and drive and then kick. And so I think the issue that I see is, with guys not being scared to attack the rim, and the Lakers knowing that they don't have somebody that can be in that area of the rim and really not need help, causes the defenders to just kind of collapse. Yeah. And then teams are able to just kick it out, and their shooters are just getting open looks. And with today's game, like that's problematic. And that's something that I saw with the Nets. That was a big thing where, guys would just drive, kick, and, it's a easy bucket for three. So that's my biggest concern for the first half. And, hopefully that doesn't carry over. Hopefully they can make some moves, or they just, change their identity a little bit, or just make some tweaks here and there that will account for that situations.
Yeah, and that's honestly kind of why I wanted to, highlight the Lakers defense, because how sustainable that is a real question mark in the second half of the season, with those concerns. So I think that's a good point by you. That's why I wanted to spotlight, hey, the Lakers played really well on the defense in the floor. And that's honestly why they are still in the number one seed contention in the West, despite being, I think, 17th or 18th in offense in terms of efficiency stats. So, yeah, I think you're probably going to see that maybe, mellow out a little bit. They're going to be a little bit closer to each other in terms of regression. My concern really was what we saw the last couple weeks. Fatigue was obviously a factor for this team. I think they a lot of them in their post-game interviews commented at it directly or hinted at it in some way, that at some point they were just like, I'm tired. Let's get the All-Star break here. And I think that kind of led to the stumbling down the stretch of that first half of the season. And so a little part of me, when we were doing these shows, you kind of amp up your concern a little bit more. And so the sleepwalking thing, like we played it up a little bit, but it wasn't a huge concern by what I thought anyways. But the actual fatigue being evident those last few games was a real concern for me. I think even more so than the sleepwalking. And the reason why it is because I'm not sure how that changes. Like, how does this week off really impact the second half of the season? Because the second half schedule is probably just as bad, and you're still dealing with that short off season. Again, I think we mention that like every podcast, but it needs to be said, because the Lakers, the Heat, and to some extent, like the Nuggets or whatever, and Celtics, like those are the only teams that really are dealing with the incredibly short offseason. Like everyone else had somewhat of a normal offseason comparatively, and even people who weren't in the bubble had a huge offseason. So like it's just there's only a few teams that this is impacting, and with the Lakers being title contenders, and our team, that's the concerning part here. And so I'm not sure how much that changes in the second half of the season with just a week off or whatever it is for the All-Star break.
Yeah.
So
I really think something that could help them in is just like a lot of these games, they just have to like fight and claw their way back in it just to give them a chance to win. And so if you're doing that, 80% of the games you play, you have to fight a deficit. You're going to be like crazy fatigued. Like, we could see it. Like you can clearly see it in these, closing out of the first half games, like just a handful of them. And it also didn't help that it was like 4 of 7 games, that 4 or 7 game stretch they had there, they were in overtime. And so, and overtime is like 5 minutes or so. It's not a crazy amount of time, but that's extra time that you're trying to win a basketball game. So you're leaving everything out on the court. So I feel like if they could try their best to eliminate these large deficits, that would really help. That it could help them not be as fatigued later on in this season leading up to the playoffs.
No, that's a really good point. I didn't think about it that way. In my mind, I was just like, well, they're going to be recharged after a week off or whatever and come out pretty strong. And then what happens in May? Like, or do you stumble again when heading into the postseason? I don't know. But if it is like you could manufacture more rest by playing more effectively and assertively early is what you're trying to say. And I think that's a fair assessment. I'm not sure. And also, Schroeder was out for a few games. AD has been out. So like their roster lineups have shrunk a little bit. And maybe that helps if you have your full complement of weapons. Although no one's going to feel sorry for the Lakers because I'm sure a bunch of teams are dealing with injuries and COVID and all that stuff. So some extent, like everyone's probably dealing with this. I just think the conference final participants in particular, like their offseason was a lot shorter than everybody else's. And I think I haven't paid attention to the other 3 as closely, but I would be interested to see if they're dealing with the same issues as well. So let's have some fun now. We had preseason awards. I want to reflect on said awards and really compare them to how we would give them out now. I'm not really letting us change them. So we can go back at the end of the year and say, hey, this is why we were idiots. But I would say it is a good time to say this is what I actually think who deserves the award based off the first half of the season, and just kind of compare the two. And hopefully we mention basically a bunch of players that are on the Lakers and contributing by the end of this podcast. If not, we'll spend a couple minutes giving shout outs at the end. So let's start with the MVP. This one's a bummer. This was, I think, the only one we swept the award, and both of us said Anthony Davis was going to be the Lakers MVP. Big yikes. I think it's a sweep on what our answer would be now, right? It's LeBron.
Yeah, it's definitely an easy choice.
Yeah, we don't have to dive too deep into it because we did just talk about LeBron, but LeBron, yes, the MVP of the Lakers, and also the NBA MVP ? Based on the first half of his season. I think most outlets would say he has the edge right now, but we'll see. Surprise player. I thought this one was a little bit more fun. Austin said KCP, and I said Marc Gasol. My first question, Austin, who was more right?
I don't know. It's hard to say. It's hard to say I'm more right.
I think it's you. I think so.
I'll touch on Gasol first. Like we kind of knew what we were getting with Marc Gasol, but I feel like he really hasn't lived up to our expectation fully. I don't personally think that's anything thing towards Gasol and his abilities. I just don't think it's his role that he has in this Lakers team, and that's just not something that we didn't know. So I don't say this is Marc Gasol's fault. Like, he's not a good player. I just think his fit in the team is probably not what we were expecting.
I looked at that through the lens of, at some point throughout the season, who surprised me more, right? Like, I'm not saying like based off. I don't think there's a clear answer between the two, but I think there was a stretch where we're like, hey, KCP is playing really well. That was surprising more than anything Marc Gasol has done in the first half of the season. So therefore, I would say your answer is more right, but we are both wrong in the sense that the obvious answer is, who's the most surprised player?
Schroeder.
I think it's Schroeder. Yes. Yeah. I will make the argument for another player, but first let's start with Schroeder. The reason why he's surprised, and I think before the season, we kind of agreed that he was maybe the third most important player on the team in terms of maybe usage, minutes, scoring, stuff like that. And I think he's exceeded expectations because he's still trying to figure out how he navigates with the lineup with like AD and LeBron and stuff, because, you know, obviously those are two superstars that you have to defer the ball to at times. But you can tell that he's still an important part of the team when one of them's not on the floor, or the vice versa, or they're both not. And I think the reason why his impact, the best proof of his impact, I guess, is when he wasn't able to play. That 4-game stretch when they went on a 4-game losing streak. Like, you could just tell. Like, yes, obviously not having AD was part of that as well, but you could just tell not having Schroeder was a real difference maker. And so I think Schroeder is probably the pick. Austin, why would you say so?
You know, that reason right there, that 4-game stretch where him and AD were both gone, like, they just looked bad. Like, it was just, you know, it was slow basketball, which is not their type of game that they play, and like, you could just really see that they were missing that, you know, that second ball handler. And just that, you know, that spark, fiery kind of player that you want on the out there, and it was just missing. I think that's why he's a surprise player, just because you didn't really think that he would have that big of an impact, and be that important. You knew he was going to be a key piece on this team, but you didn't really notice how big he was until he wasn't there.
Yeah, that's completely fair. I want to make the argument for another player because I want to mention as many players as possible, but Kyle Kuzma, who, if you go back and listen to the podcast, was almost my pick for this category. I said I almost thought about Kyle Kuzma. I think he has a real argument for it, and I think there were a lot of the same arguments that I had before the season. It was like, if he accepts that, hey, I'm just going to be a very highly active role player and embraces that, then he could surprise a lot of the Lakers fans. And that's exactly what he's done. Like, on nights when they needed him to step up because someone's not on the floor and they needed him to score, he's done that. But on most nights, he's a guy who is crashing the glass, you know, getting putbacks. He's going to dart through the lane and play really good defense. And I think because of that, that's very surprising, because this comes on the heels of him getting paid, and he could have easily just said, screw it, I'm done. Like, I'm just going to get mine. And he's just bought in, and that's great to see. And they've kind of made a big deal about it, you know, for almost after every game that he plays well, but he deserves it.
Yeah, I'm really glad to see Kuz just like buying into his role and to what they expect him to do. And like, it's amazing to see how he is now compared to what he was in his rookie year. Because like, I was a big fan of him in his rookie year, and like, you know, he's such a better player now, and like, he's just a more well-rounded player, and it's really awesome to see.
Disappointing player. You actually predicted Kyle Kuzma, and I predicted Wesley Matthews. Do I have to ask who was more right?
No, definitely not.
I nailed that. I would say that was the only one I probably nailed. Yeah, he's the answer, right? Kyle Kuzma, or not, Wesley Matthews. Sorry.
Yeah, Wes Matthews is. It's, you know, he's sitting. He's not being played in games. He's just kind of a disappointing guy. Nothing near what we thought we were getting when they brought him here.
The last one was what seed you expect the Lakers to have. You said 2 seed. I said 1 seed. And it was interesting to go back and listen to your reasoning for that. Like, you actually brought up a lot of the real points of why the Lakers should be the 2 seed instead. And I didn't factor in that enough. And so I would say you're probably more right because, well, they are the 3 seed right now. And I still think they could be the 1 seed. It's just like, I wouldn't say that's definitely going to happen. I wouldn't be as confident as I was, 3 months ago when I predicted that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't even remember the reasons why I said they are the 2 seed, but they could. I feel like the 1 seed isn't out of question, and they could still get that. But do you put in all this effort to get the 1 seed and then be, fatigued and stuff come playoff time where you're just you're out of gas and you can't get the job done? So I think they'll take what they can get and just kind of be, go through the playoffs being like, you doubted us again, and we're going to prove you wrong.
Oh man, I'm so ready for everyone to make a big deal about, those few talking heads who predict against the Lakers in the playoffs, because that was the most annoying thing, but also the best thing at the end of the postseason. But yeah, that's the seed conversation is a good transition into looking forward. That's how we're gonna close out this podcast. We're not gonna dive too deep on this. I just wanted to hit on things that we haven't really discussed and what we want to look forward to for the second half season. We've kind of hinted at a lot of the things that we want to see. But I would say, for me anyways, I'm interested in seeing if we get a clearer picture of who is closing games out, who the closing lineup, who is Frank Vogel going to trust when he needs a win. And I think there's been a lot of tinkering, and I think rightfully so. Again, as I was saying earlier, scene setter, you're figuring out new pieces. But I think you're going to see familiar faces be the favorites for the closing lineup, your KCP, right? LeBron, AD, obviously, and then Caruso, Kuzma, maybe, and then it's between KCP and Schroeder. I think, right?
Okay. Yeah, I was going to ask you kind of what would be your idea of a closing lineup, and I think that's kind of who I had in mind. Obviously you put AD at the 5. Kuz is going to play that 3-4. LeBron's going to be the 3 or 4. It might not matter as much, maybe. But then it comes down to Schroeder, KCP, and Caruso, I would think. Maybe it just depends on the night and the matchup and who they have is who those guard closing lineups would be. But if they put Schroeder or KCP, out there, I wouldn't have an issue with that. If it was Caruso and KCP or Caruso and Schroeder, I would be comfortable with either of those, 2 of those 3 out on the court to close the game. I wouldn't see a problem with it, unless it was clearly a matchup issue and one of them was out there. It was just evident with how the game was going, then maybe you would question it. But I think between those, six guys, you could have a pretty good closing lineup.
Well, the way we just talked it out, I think it might be already clear. I was hoping that's what I want to see is a clearer picture, but it might already be clear. We might already have, the 6 guys and you just pick 5 of them. But because I don't think Trez is in the mix. Obviously, we mentioned Wesley Matthews. I don't even know if he's going to be in the roster rotation when it's the playoffs. And then THT obviously not. So and Marc Gasol probably not. So I think we might have just already had a clear picture of the closing lineup.
We figured it out for them. So if we see those lineups, we know that it came from us.
Exactly. Secrets out. And anything else that you wanted to touch on? I think we actually did already hit on Kuzma and Schroeder, who I wanted to mention before we close this thing out. So is there anything else you want to mention before we take out of here?
There's not.
Okay, no buyout market. I thought you wanted to do that.
No, we don't have to talk about that. If I knew who was getting bought out, if those choices were more obvious, then maybe we could touch on it. But I have no idea who's getting bought out or what.
Okay, you want to show off your rings real quick before we dip out of here, then? Or do you
Yeah,
not
I
have them?
can. Yeah,
Okay.
I got them. So
This is the YouTube version, by the way.
So for the video, folks, I decided to just buy the Kobe Bryant championship rings, which is I was a huge fan of Kobe, so I wanted these. I mean, that's it. They're just replicas, but they are like super dope. So
did you want to describe them to the audio version? And you got a case with that as well.
Yes, it came with the case for the audio people. They're just rings and they're replicas.
Yeah.
I don't know how to explain it better than that.
Okay. Well, you're not a storyteller. That's for sure.
I am not.
Okay. Well, that's probably gonna do it. I'm gonna go celebrate my birthday tonight because I am working all day tomorrow. I have a 4-hour round trip on the road to go cover state basketball, where I'm going to be in the gym for 7 hours covering state basketball. So I have like an 11-hour day ahead of me tomorrow. It's going to be miserable. So I'm celebrating with the girlfriend tonight for my birthday. So yeah, so that's what I'm going to do. And you're going to enjoy a weekend probably of not watching basketball, it sounds like.
Yep.
So yeah, we'll be back at some point. I would imagine probably Sunday is my immediate guess, or early next week. But at some point after a basketball game. And to get a clearer idea about that, just follow us on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, at Lakers Theory, YouTube even, if you just subscribe and you get notifications for when we go live, because we will go live the next time on all platforms. So make sure you're following some sort of platform there if you want the show right then and there. That's going to do it, though, for the mid-season recap of the Lakers basketball from the Lakers Theory crew here. He's Austin Case. I'm Shane Jackson. Thank you so much for listening today, and see you next time, Lakers fans.